Hello and welcome. I am the Letterhack, and with me now are two very special guests from the Prison Library Support Network, or PLSN, Manuela and Mia. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Matt.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. You guys are both coming from different locations. You know, our listeners are used to background noise. That's cool. I actually like hearing like sirens and city noises. I'm down south, so I could use some city. So that is not a problem at all. Um, I really do appreciate you being here. This is a topic that we want to be talking about more here, and we've talked about a little bit so far. I just want to briefly introduce what PLSN is and then turn it over to you. The Prison Library Support Network is an information based collective founded in 2016 to support incarcerated people by organizing networks for sharing resources and building capacity for the movement for prison abolition in libraries, archives, and other knowledge based institutions. So, like I said, we are very much about this here. We've platformed folks who are pro prison abolition, some that you're collaborating with, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And so when I heard about PLSN, I thought, well, I just got to have you on and you can tell us more about your network and also see how we can get people to continue to support you. So, um, please take a moment and you guys can take turns. I guess we'll start with Manuela. Tell us about yourself. How the origins of how you got in with this network, how it came about, why libraries, why books, and what makes you passionate about prison abolition.
Cool. I'm happy to start. I joined the Prison Library Support Network in 2018, and it was kind of amazingly fortuitous timing. It was my first day of grad school at Pratt Institute. I was getting my MLI. I got my MLIS from Pratt, and I happened to see some email come through about a volunteer event that Mia happened to be running. And it ended up being a virtual book drive for getting books into prisons, and we were emailing publishers and getting donations that way, and I had a blast and I felt a connection with Mia. So I really asked Mia how I could be further involved with the organization, and then I think together we've really seen the organization grow. So I am a librarian by day. I'm a middle school librarian, actually, so I'm very interested in access of information and everything for absolutely everybody, and that's my ties to libraries and PLSN and how I became involved.
Well, that's great. Mia, what about you?
Um, well, I have lots of background noise to be the backdrop
That's
to
great.
what I'm about to say. I got involved in PLSN when like, in founding it. I I got into libraries and started working in libraries and was excited about them because of the potential to like build power collectively through sharing knowledge and like collective learning outside of universities and outside of the academy. Because of where I'm from and like my loved ones growing up, some of whom were like in and out of custody, I knew going into librarianship that figuring out ways to use the skills that I was learning to support prison abolition to also just like share resources with the people surviving incarceration, whether it was abolitionist or not, was something that I kind of like went into library school very interested in. It was really clear that there were other people that were interested in doing similar work. So for me, it's been a pretty incredible thing to see us go from this kind of like unaffiliated or disconnected group of people trying to imagine using our skills as librarians for something kind of radical and not defined, into like a organization that has like a lot of um, developed and I think like projects that we're really proud of. Stop there.
Your website is great, and just so everyone knows, I'll keep reiterating this. We have links to a lot of your stuff, your official website, how to donate books, how to volunteer, email contact. It's all in the description of this video. So anyone watching and listening, please scroll down and hit those links. Your website is great. And there's like a whole timeline about the network, and people should check that out, and people should see how it's come about and where it's at now. But what I'm curious about is how things have changed or evolved since you were founded in 2016. Like, what sort of positive impact has your work had on the prison system and with inmates? And that's for
Manuela,
either one of you.
Yeah, I can start a little bit, and I can maybe talk about like the evolution of these book drives that I
Sure.
mentioned at the beginning. So basically, Mia had started to build these amazing relationships with the public library systems, and that's Queens, Brooklyn, and New York Public Library System, all three of which are huge, and all three of which do have correctional services divisions in some capacity, but unfortunately not as like funded or staffed as well as we'd like.
Mhm.
So we started doing these book drives where, like I said, we would email publishers and start asking for book donations that would then be put into the prison collections. Something that people, I think, don't really know is that while there are New York public librarians in the prisons, that the incarcerated people don't have access to the New York Public Library catalog, for example. They like are just stuck with the books that are in those prison libraries, and oftentimes those are donations, and they're not what people actually want to be reading. So we saw this need. We started emailing publishers, and through those drives have built ongoing relationships with tons of publishers and set up things like recurring donations. So we have contacts with different publishers who now send regular donations to these prison
Oh, wow.
libraries, which is awesome.
Sure.
And also, we were able to start really doing personalized requests for titles that we knew people actually wanted to be reading. After the pandemic, we also adapted to, we've had one of these drives virtually now. So, people were emailing from all over the United States, which was super cool. And I would say that's another huge way that our organization has evolved is that now, almost all of the work we do is virtual. So we have volunteers from all over the place, which is very, very cool. I should pass it over to Mia to talk about the reference service, though, because there's been a huge evolution as well with that. If you're cool with that, Mia.
yeah, totally. I'm like, I don't want to blow all of our 50 minutes on this answer because I could talk about reference forever. But like,
Go ahead.
so
Whatever you want.
for people who are like kind of not super steeped in librarian lingo, reference like refers to the like act of providing research assistance. So like one of the kind of core classes in getting a librarian degree is like a reference class. And at the library school that Manuela and I went to, which is at Pratt Institute, the reference class has a partnership with the New York Public Library's Jail and Prison Services Division. And the like students answer like maybe like 2 letters each a semester as an assignment. And coming out of that, there were so many people who were like, I want to keep doing this. But it was really clear that the public libraries, who are like, they have like skeleton staff, like that didn't have capacity really to coordinate volunteers. So we started first with doing kind of letter writing events with Brooklyn Public Library, which kind of evolved into this really exciting system we set up right before the pandemic where like people could ask questions in person. So when librarians from the public libraries were pushing book carts around Rikers, like the way people get books is coming up and saying like, do you have a book about XYZ? And they have one cart, so it's pretty regular that people ask about things that there are no books for. Sorry about the noise.
That's okay.
And that like they don't really have a way of getting the books for. So things like love poems in Spanish around Valentine's Day, or like knitting patterns for adult like child Pokemon hats, which is just an example of a reference question.
Sure.
But we would have the librarians post the requests they got in person on like a shared table, and then volunteers would make like 20-page packets that were printable that they could bring in person and give to somebody in lieu of a book. But one of the really sad things that happened when COVID-19 reared its head was that like the libraries immediately got shut out of all the facilities they were working in, and there was no clear plan for years about if they would be brought back in and in what capacity. And so that's when we really started focusing on launching a kind of like entirely volunteer powered national reference letter service, which over the past 2 years went from kind of, you know, getting like 20 letters a month to now getting 200. I feel like there are challenges we never foresaw in meeting that volume, but we've also like watched us go from a place where we weren't connected at all with researchers inside to being like an a lot of people for research help. So that's something that, as far as I know, there aren't other examples of. So we're really proud of, but there's also so much to say about it because there are like, I could talk forever about the challenges.
Well, and you dropped out for just a second there, but I think we got it all. Here,
Okay.
I gotta tell you, New York City is one of my favorite places in the whole world. We have a bunch of listeners from there, of this podcast, and I just imagine them being on the street corner, listening to you on the street corner, and the levels of cacophony, and I think it's funny. So here's my next question. In general, is there a more social awareness and understanding about prison abolition? And do you guys find yourself, as opposed to when you started this in 2016, and do you ever find yourself in a situation where you have to explain to somebody in terms that will help them understand the need for abolishing the prison system as we know it? I think of people like my parents or what we call boomers, people who are like, yeah, well, it sounds good, but what exactly are you talking about? Because safety first, right? Are we talking about criminals running around the street? And we're not. So how do you word this explanation specifically, if in fact you've been in that situation? Is that something that comes up?
It is. Manuela, is it okay if I go first? But then I feel like you should
Yes,
weigh in.
absolutely. Yes.
Manuela hosts a book club at the Metropolitan Library Council in New York that is a like prison abolition book club. So I feel like that is a place where people absolutely come to ask kind of like their first line of questions after encountering prison abolition. But also I remember the first meeting PLSN had, it was like in this like embarrassing bar that had a lot of space in the Village. And I remember a go around and someone saying like, I'm a prison abolitionist, and everybody being like, because it was like not it wasn't like, I don't remember it being regular to encounter other people outside of abolitionist spaces who like, A, were comfortable identifying that way, and then B, like, who like, I don't know, felt like they understood abolition enough to lead with that. But I remember for years kind of feeling like what are we doing? Because we started PLSN not to be like leaders in the abolitionist movement ever, but to try to organize in our own communities to support people like Miriam Kaba and Survived and Punished, who have been kind of like, paving the way. So one of the things that is like markedly different is that there's more than one abolitionist library organization now. There are lots of conversations that we can refer to. There are other people we can go to be like, is this an abolitionist approach to sharing information? Instead of feeling like we are like fumbling towards this new way of doing what we're doing. My standard answer, because I feel like especially in 2016, 2017, 2018, a lot of people would come to PLSN things and have this question about safety, about abolition. whether it was like, what are we gonna do with people who commit sexual assault, or people just worrying about sharing information like stuff about medical conditions because who knows if
Yeah.
it was safe. Like, I feel like one of the things we try to have in our like value statements as abolitionists is like, no cops, no saviors. So there's a way that it is pretty easy to refer to that in those moments and say like, listen, like we can have a conversation about abolition between the two of us, but as a collective, like we don't police information for the cops. Like we'll give people what they ask for because like part of our value, like people have the right to like determine what they need.
That you
I
said part of your values.
Yeah, part of our values,
Okay.
part of our like sorry if you can't hear me or there's
It
any
just
pollution.
dropped out for a second again, but we got it.
I would say like personally when I'm engaged in those conversations, I really like to lean on like abolitionist like voices. So like for me, like critical resistance is like abolition 101, which is like this just series of discussion exercises. Like it's something I'll always bring up first because like it will walk people through thinking about what safety actually means. But then also, sorry, I'll
No,
just
you're
stop
good.
there.
No, that's not, well, Manuela, you can take it up, but no, that's fine. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I
Critical
don't have
resistance. I'm writing that down.
I don't have too much to add. I think Mia kind of nailed it. But we're kind of like referencing back to this book club slash discussion group that we that I help lead or that I co-lead. We walk away from those conversations feeling so empowered and optimistic that there are people who have similar values as us, and then also remembering that like people are coming to this explicitly abolitionist discussion group, and we are just a small number. So kind of like reining ourselves in sometimes to be like, I don't think that the widespread opinion is that prisons should be abolished when we're looking at it in a systemic sense. And when you look at statistics and everything, like incarceration rates are not decreasing, prisons are not going away. So in that sense, like I do think there's a broader awareness of this kind of thing, especially when it goes hand in hand with, police reform and that kind of thing that really became um, like on the tip of everybody's tongues in the past few years. But I guess that's kind of what I'm thinking is like kind of this reining in of like there are definitely people who know the resources that Mia is talking about and that we reference all the time, like call themselves abolitionists. But then again, that is a specific circle that we are including ourselves in. I hope that makes sense.
It does. And I forget exactly where this was, but I was just reading about someplace. I want to say it was Minneapolis, but I do not have this numbers in front of me. It was like crime went down. They have less people imprisoned. Everything's looking good, but the prison budget is continuing to go up. And so it's just another privatized industry. It's just another way for somebody to make money. And so I think it's really good what you guys are doing. And I think it's a shame that you don't have more direct funding for this. And I wonder, Mia, did you want to add to that
Yeah,
before
if
I
you
move
don't
on?
mind, I feel like this is the longest
Sure.
answer in the history of the
No, go
universe.
ahead.
But like, I feel like part of it felt like what you were getting at is also just like how we personally like our strategies for answering questions about like how abolition could ever protect people from from violence. And one of the things I personally think about a lot is like how difficult it is to identify any invested resources or moments of success in policing or the history of incarceration around prevention, right? Like as a survivor, I feel like there are lots of survivors involved in PLSN. For me, like when I think about being safe and I think about like what would protect like me and my own experience from violence, like it's addressing the reasons people are violent,
Yes.
which
Right.
prisons have no interest in.
Right.
Like their cops are very happy to come after somebody has been hurt and very quick to like turn people down. So one of the things I like to do is ask people if they can think of times like police have actually been the safety measure we think they are. Like every school shooting, do they come in? Like, do they use
Right.
that SWAT team money? And then once at a book club, I heard somebody say, if people have questions about how abolition would look, like they should pay attention to people like Jeffrey Epstein. Like there are people who exist in our world, in the free world, like doing all the things we talk about being afraid of being done if we didn't have incarceration, and there are no consequences, and
Right.
people know. So like I feel like it's like it feels like challenging people to actually think about where safety exists in their lives and how it's created, I found to be one of the most meaningful ways of like addressing those questions.
It's a great answer, and it really does seem like, you can buy your way out of trouble, no problem. And if you can't, that's what prisons are for. I want to ask though, are there cases where a prison may not have a library at all or any materials for learning and reading? Does that happen, and where do you come into play?
I mean, the answer is yes, there are
I
examples
figured.
of that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's very common actually.
Are you
And
allowed to
also,
help in those cases, or is it like if it doesn't exist, it's for a reason?
I don't know, Mia, are you able to? I mean,
Yeah.
we do not do the reference service in like every prison in America. Unfortunately, we have a limited, number that we work with. But
Hmm.
yeah, I think Mia could. That's just like a capacity problem on our end. It's not because we wouldn't want to help those
Well,
yeah, institutions.
also it might be helpful to say that like part of how we wanted our reference service to be different than what exists in public libraries is like seeing what it would look like not to have an affiliation with the DOC. So like people find our address in newsletters, they find our flyer, um, sometimes in different newsletters or in mail that we send back. And then they write to us. And so we'll do our best to read about what library resources are in a particular place, but we'll also like read the mail rules and send as much as we can as per those rules.
Yeah.
Since COVID has happened, we've heard from so many people around the country through letters that they have not had any access to libraries, any access to information. I mean, I was just talking to a group of researchers who have like a longer term project they're working on that I'm helping with in San Quentin. And they talked about how they know San Quentin has one of the best libraries of any facility, but like what that looks like in real time is like 5 minutes of sitting with a librarian who's Googling. So it's like if
Oh.
you try to think about how much can you actually do, like how much could you actually explore or find from things like important documents related to people's cases. Like we see so many letters of people just being like, I want to see the records that are the basis with which like my entire life is now in custody, to things that are like, I want a FOSTA form, I want song lyrics. Yeah, I feel like it really runs the gamut, but it seems like across the board, whether there are library services or not, they're limited in ways that are hard to imagine based on kind of how you navigate information outside.
I just wanted to plug a really quick podcast, or really quickly plug a podcast that came out on June 19th. It's the Beyond Prisons podcast. And the episode is called Prison Librarians. And there was an interview with two people who we work closely with and really admire, Sarah Ball and Jeannie Austin, who are both prison librarians. But I was just thinking about how that would be a great resource because they talk a lot about the variation of information services in prisons, and just like how it's total crapshoot whether there's even a qualified librarian working in a prison library. So that they do a really good job talking about that disparity.
Wow. Okay, great. Thanks for plugging that. I definitely want to check that out. Um, okay, let's talk about how you organize. And I wonder, like, is it just you guys in an army of volunteers? Are there more people involved? Do you have more regular volunteers, or is it like just for events? And what kind of training do you provide? How do you keep from getting overwhelmed? How do you keep your head above water, and how do you keep this going?
It is not easy.
Yeah, I imagine it's a lot of work.
Totally. Manuela, do you want to start? I feel like I started last.
Well,
Yeah,
and
I
because
can start.
it
Yeah.
sounds like I'm sorry to interrupt. It just sounds like the more support you get, the more impact you'll have, right? And of course, like obviously it'll streamline some processes, I'm sure. But sometimes volunteers doesn't make it easier, right? But it could make it more impactful. So I just, I wonder.
Oh, absolutely. And something that Mia and I always have talked about for years is that like our problem has never been a lack of volunteers.
Hmm.
But it it really is like streamlining these processes. So the short answer is like it's absolutely not just Mia and I. That would be a huge disservice to the people who volunteer with us. And I mean, Mia can speak more to like this reference project, where like there's a whole team now of people who are just involved with training new reference volunteers, and that's neither Mia or myself. So that has kind of just been like
Oh,
outsourced to another team of volunteers. There's a whole reference coordination team that's involved with processing letters and helping the volunteers who are answering letters on top of the volunteers who are answering the letters. We have, this abolition discussion group, which I co-lead with another longtime volunteer. And it's just, yeah, there's a huge network of PLSN volunteers. Actually, this seems like a good time to say also that if you're interested in becoming a volunteer with the Prison Library Support Network, you do not need to be a librarian or an information professional. People often ask that question.
good to know.
We have volunteers with so many different backgrounds and expertise that help us out, and we would be really lost without them. So that's something that we always like to remind ourselves to say.
That's
But
great.
Mia, do you want to speak a little bit more about our volunteer network?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you like mentioned something that I think about all the time, which is like the tension between like having like a huge like community to mobilize and like things being less work. So like I feel like with PLSN, one of the things that I know I thought about a lot when we were first starting was like how we could organize events where people could come and like do something in a few hours that would make
Smart.
a difference and wouldn't require work beyond that, beyond like me and Manuela and like maybe a group of like I would say of like 10 people who kind of were always rotating. And yeah, I mean, I feel like I don't know if there are any organizers listening. I I feel like it was a pretty successful strategy. One of the reasons we started our like reference service, which was the first time we started something that was permanent and was going to require ongoing kind of like maybe like more than like 5 people to permanently be working on something.
Hmm.
I feel like we made that decision because we kept finding ourselves in a position where we would set up like a reference project, like the one where we were making packets to bring into Rikers, and then something would happen with the public libraries or the DOC, and like it would be shut down because like the librarians prioritize the people they're serving, and like we want them to do that. We have no problems with that, but like we found that like through event-based stuff, it was hard to kind of like set up projects that we felt like we could use to really build ongoing relationships. There has been it's like there are pros and cons. Like there are ways that what our reference project has brought in people around the country who we didn't know before, who's like become extremely central to PLSN. I would say there are about like 20 people a month who sign up for shifts to process mail and review letters and answer volunteer questions. But we, like Manuela was saying, have always known one of like our assets is like being connected to people who have capacity to contribute in various ways and in various amounts. And so, like, we do ourselves a disservice when we organize in ways that don't allow people to sign up for one letter a year and contribute that way, or run a book club, or copy edit something. And it can create a lot of work, but every time I feel like we've tried to sidestep the work of organizing ways for people to plug in, it seemed like it's kind of compromising just the major resource we're working with, which is like people, because we don't make money.
Yeah.
We're doing this as volunteers.
It sounds like you're looking for a diverse group of volunteers, which is awesome because that could be anybody and everybody. And you're giving them the opportunity to volunteer in a number of ways, including show up on this day and volunteer right now. It's like what I call a here and now deadline. It's not like ongoing where you have to manage them. Show up here, we'll do the work, and that'll be that, right? That sounds really smart. Do you so you have events that fundraising events, and you have an art show coming up in Brooklyn, New York. Can you talk about that a little bit? And of course, I'll keep resharing the flyer for that event. But can you talk about that? It's a collaboration with ABO Comics, right?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. Since I'm kind of, well, it's actually happening in my loft space in Brooklyn, so I'm very excited to be back in New York to do that. But yeah, it is a really cool collaboration with ABO Comics. Like you said, we have a volunteer who's helped out with our social media in the past, Ollie Mills. They are awesome. Shout out to Ollie, who also works at ABO Comics and sent an email. Maybe 6 months ago or so, asking for some sort of venue in New York to host an art show in, and I jumped at it because that's the kind of thing I love to do in my space. And so they connected us with an incarcerated artist, Stephen Levy, and we're going to be showcasing Stephen's work um, all month in this loft and having an art opening on August 12th for anyone who's in the New York City area. And all of the artist's work will be for sale and benefit Stephen's commissary fund. So we're really excited for that. This is the first art show that we've had, but I hope it's one of many. I think the rest of our events currently having are virtual. So we do have ongoing reference trainings. Those take place on Zoom and they happen about once a month. And it's been a while since we've had a book drive. We should probably get on that again. But we also have our quarterly Abolitionist Futures discussion group, which anyone is welcome to join. I'm laughing because it used to be a book club, then we changed it to a discussion group because now we discuss scenes and videos and
Oh,
podcasts
cool.
and all sorts of things and really try to make it like a light lift in terms of the materials we're discussing because everyone's super busy.
Yeah.
Mia and I also onboard new volunteers once a month. We do like a general 30-minute Zoom orientation to who PLSN is, but that's a great call to jump on if you just kind of want to know what projects are in the air. And Matt, I'll make sure that you have a link posted to how to subscribe to our newsletter because we do have a
Oh,
monthly
great.
newsletter that just keeps getting more and more exciting, in my
Great.
opinion. And I'm not just saying that because Mia and I write it every month, but that has all of the events that we're having each month with links on how to register for our virtual events and addresses and all that kind of thing. So that's
That's
kind of the
great.
best way to know what events are on the horizon.
Well, thanks so much for being here tonight, and consider me a resource, okay? If you need to come on and plug an event, feel free to do it. I'll make the time. Um, I have shows all the time where I can just take a quick call, or we can do, a full segment. It's up to you. But I'm behind you guys. I got your back, and I'm sure my audience will as well. Um, I do want to give you a chance to plug anything else that you want to mention before you go. But I also there's one thing that we always do here. We talk about comic books a lot, and I have to assume somebody out there is hoping to get comics into a prison library, and that is something that um I would be able to donate tons of comics to that cause. So keep me in mind if that comes up. And I know lots of people who own comic shops that may also be willing to do that if those sorts of things are allowed. And we could probably make that happen. But I want to recommend a book to you guys because I get the feeling that you need some escapism. You need to get away from it all every now and then, right? And I'm sure you do that. I'm sure you practice self-care. That's really important with folks who do the kind of um, work that you do where it's very selfless, but you have to be concerned with your own well-being, right? So I have a comic book I want to recommend to you guys. It's not exactly a comic book, but I think it'll be appealing to people who went to, you called it librarian school, right? You have degrees?
Yes, yes. So it's a
Okay.
library master's.
Okay, that's awesome. Okay, this book is called I Will Judge You by Your Bookshelf by Grant Snyder. Have you ever heard of this by
I
any
haven't,
chance?
no.
I have
Okay,
not either.
it's a full color graphic novel celebrating the culture of fanaticism of book lovers, their books, authors, and reading in general. Grant Snyder's comics have appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times, Book Review, and more. And so, I just thought I Will Judge You by Your Bookshelf. It's a hilarious collection of things that fans of books and especially librarians would find, you know, relatable in a humorous way. So check that out. Um,
Awesome. Thank you.
yeah, and thank you. And sincerely, I could talk about this with you for a long time, but I don't want to keep you all night. So, is there anything else that you want to plug or mention before we go?
Me, I talked about some of the upcoming things. So if there's anything else you want to plug, go for it.
I got the
I
newsletter.
mean,
That's a good one.
I would say the only things I want to say are thank you for
Oh, sure.
saying such nice things about our work, having us on here, and then B, I mean, I know we already said this in some form, but like one of the things that has just been resounding that we've seen is that like people need information, and then also like it means so much to people to like be trusted with the resources to do their own like psychic and intellectual like exploration. So if there is anyone out there that has a lot of hours and energy and time, like these types of services are needed. I mean, like we know what we've learned and we'll always share it. And like we're here to support other people trying to do similar work as well. So reach out to us whether you want to volunteer or we can help you.
Awesome. Thank you both for being here. I really do appreciate it. And thanks everyone for tuning in. PLSN, the Prison Library Support Network. Check it out, get involved, look at the links, subscribe to the newsletter, and we'll see you next time.
The letter hack. Oh my gosh. You don't miss